parish and children of this good communities, as well as children of any ages, as we gather on this Friday afternoon, the 24th of April, for another Bible story from the Children's Bible Picture Book and the St. Joseph Junior Edition. Now, today's Bible story is going to be about Zacchaeus the Publican. So now, Zacchaeus is an interesting person. Today we also remember the conversion of St. Augustine. St. Augustine had lived a wild life as a young man. And his mother's prayers, St. Monica, praying for him to change his bad ways. A mother's love is very powerful. Never get in the way of a mother's love for her child, for her children. And Monica was not going to let that devil keep taking her son away. So Monica prayed and prayed for Augustine to change his heart, which today we celebrate in our church's tradition. He left the ways of darkness and followed the ways of the light in Jesus. Now this is similar to Zacchaeus. That's why I make the connection between Augustine and Zacchaeus. So one day, Jesus was passing through the city of Jericho. Jericho should be a familiar name to all of us. Remember Jericho in the Old Testament? Joshua at the walls of Jericho, marching around the walls of Jericho, singing praise to Yahweh. And then finally those walls came tumbling down. Well, here Jericho's still there. It's still a very large city, missing its walls, of course. But there's Jesus visiting Jericho in Israel. It was the center of one of the tax collecting districts, and the many tax collectors were employed there. Meaning, this was a source of money for the Roman Empire, for the Roman governor, to keep the Roman soldiers in Jerusalem, in Galilee, to keep the Roman eagle ever before the Jewish people. So it took money to keep legions, the troops, in Jerusalem. And where'd that money come from? It came from the people that were being subjected, that were being bullied, that were being controlled by the Romans. They had to give over their money to pay the soldiers to keep them in bondage, to hold them down, to keep them in their place. Tax collectors collected money from the Jewish people and then turned it over to the Roman governor. Who were the tax collectors? Usually the tax collectors were Jewish people themselves. People from their own town or their own area working for the Romans against their own people, taking money or taking property or taking livestock like sheep or like goats, and then turning it over to the Roman governor. So it's a vicious cycle of meanness visited upon the Jewish people. So here's Zacchaeus. He is one of the big shot tax collectors of the Jewish people working for the Romans. The chief tax collector was usually a wealthy man. So Zacchaeus, he's the chief tax collector in Jericho. He's a wealthy man. Because usually tax collectors kept a little for themselves. You know, maybe 3 coins to the Romans and 2 coins for me. Or 4 coins to the Romans and 1 coin for the tax collector. He had learned of Jesus coming, so the news is out. Jesus is coming to Jericho. Just like we usually know when someone is coming to our community. To our state. The word gets out these days through the wonders of social media networking. Look who's coming to our community. Look who's coming to our state. What great musical band is playing and where they're playing at. And what's the location. And so we always know through the social media network who's coming and where they're going to be if we want to go see them. Either in sports or in music. Whatever it might, politics, whatever it might be. Well, the word got out in Jericho. Of course not through social media. They didn't have that then. But they had very busy mouths and tongues, and they talked. So they spread the word. Jesus is coming to Jericho. So Zacchaeus knows this chief tax collector. And he was anxious to see what kind of person he was. So Zacchaeus is curious about Jesus. Who is this guy that he keeps hearing about? And some of these miracles. How do you feed 5,000 men, plus women, plus children, with just a few loaves and fishes? How do you do that? How do you heal someone who's blind, who can't speak or can't hear? How is Jesus doing that? And how do you bring someone back from the dead? So Zacchaeus, like many others, were hearing these stories about Jesus. So he's curious. I'd like to see who this guy really is. So he went down to the roadside where Jesus was coming, walking by. But there were so many people. Have you ever been in a big crowd before? Sure, most of us have. You can get shoulder to shoulder. Remember when we used to gather in big crowds before the sheltering in, before the terribleness of this pandemic? But crowds can be very confining. You can't move. You can't go forward. You can't go backwards. It's very difficult because of a large number of people. We probably have all experienced that in some way. So this is what Zacchaeus is experiencing. A lot of people on the roadside waiting to see Jesus. And on top of all of this, Zacchaeus is not a tall person. He is a short person in stature. He's very, very small. He's not that big. So he couldn't even see Jesus. So Zacchaeus ran ahead, climbed to a sycamore tree to watch Jesus as he passed by. Obviously, Zacchaeus is quick thinking, though. He'll find that sycamore tree, he'll climb it, then he'll be higher than the crowd, and then he'll be able to see Jesus. How many of you have climbed a tree to get a better view? You climb a tree pretty high if it's a good, strong tree with strong limbs that you can climb and look around you and you can see quite a lot. Remember? Well, that's what Zacchaeus did. Climbed the sycamore tree so he could see above the crowd, so he could see Jesus, who he's heard so much about. Now, when Jesus reached the spot where Zacchaeus was in the sycamore tree, Jesus looked up, called to Zacchaeus to come down. So there's Zacchaeus up in the tree. Jesus sees Zacchaeus up in the tree. And then Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. Get down from there. Why? Why is Jesus telling Zacchaeus to come down from that tree? Because Jesus says, I must visit your house today. Whoa! Here Jesus is going to visit a house of a tax collector. Not just a tax collector, but the big shot tax collector in Jericho. So you know Zacchaeus' house is going to be a pretty beautiful, multi-level house with a lot of rooms and probably good food and good wine and all the hospitalities that one with a little extra wealth can provide. And Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, he was not liked by his fellow Jewish people. Probably the Jewish people in Jericho did not like Zacchaeus. Why? Well, remember, he's working for the Romans. The Romans have the heavy hand. They're the bullies. They control Jerusalem with their army, with their legions. You probably have all seen some movies or have read our history of the Roman Empire. They could be a cruel bunch of people when push came to shove. They wanted law, they wanted order, they wanted your money, they wanted you keep your mouth shut. So here's Zacchaeus is working for them, taking fellow Jewish people money, paying for the heavy hand of the Roman Empire. So he's not liked. He's probably hated, despised. Probably not too many people go to Zacchaeus' house for dinner. And he probably doesn't invite too many people to his house for dinner. Probably is alone a lot. Alone counting his money. Well, money can only go so far, right? So here's Zacchaeus, who hears the words from Jesus. I'm going to come to your house today. Zacchaeus, of course, hurried down from the sycamore tree. This would be a good picture, some artwork to think about over the weekend of drawing this picture with your creativity through paints or through colors or crayons or through sketches, through chalk, or through the computer. Of Zacchaeus up in a sycamore tree and Jesus calling him down from the sycamore tree. Or a picture of Zacchaeus hurrying down from the sycamore tree. Think about it. Your artwork is important. How you see the words in your mind and how you create them with your heart and your hand. So we can start putting them up on our windows as our own stained glass windows from your artwork. So Zacchaeus comes down from the tree happy. But the Pharisees, here's the other big shots in town. The Pharisees were not priests. They were men who knew the law of Torah. They knew the Jewish customs, the traditions, the commandments. They had the scrolls that everything was written upon. Ordinary people didn't have the scrolls. There weren't that many to be passed out, to be able to be read on your own. So the Pharisees, through time, became very powerful because they had the scrolls, which everything was written down on the traditions and the teachings of Moses and the Ten Commandments. So they remind people, this is how you are to live. They would preach to them, tell them, but they're not clergy. But they are the big shots. And ordinary people have to listen to them, follow their instructions. So here the Pharisees, they started to complain when they saw what was happening. So what's happening? Remember, Zacchaeus coming down from the sycamore tree, Jesus saying he is going to have dinner at his house tonight. The Pharisees are hearing this, and they don't like what they hear. They don't like Zacchaeus, and they don't like Jesus. He has gone to stay at the house of a sinner. They consider Zacchaeus a sinner. Why? Because he doesn't follow the traditions. He doesn't follow the commandments. He does not follow the law of Moses. Zacchaeus has his own agenda. Work for the Romans, be the tax collector, get wealthy. Zacchaeus said to Jesus, "Now look, sir," so he's polite. Zacchaeus is polite to Jesus. He calls him sir. He doesn't say, "Hey, you." He doesn't say, "Yeah." He says, "Look, sir, I'm going to give half of my property to the poor." Wow, that's a big deal. Who knows how much is half of his property? There probably weren't very good auditing procedures at that time. Standardized auditing process and procedures probably weren't in practice. You could probably ask Pam Lynch, because she is an accountant, what auditing procedures are. Or maybe ask your mom and dad if they work as an accountant. There's a lot of rules you have to follow to keep track of money. Well, Zacchaeus, with his money, who knows how much he has, but he does say to Jesus, "I'll give half of my property to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody," which I'm sure if there was a crowd around Jesus and Zacchaeus, and they heard Zacchaeus say this, "If I have cheated anybody," they must have burst out laughing or snickering or pointing to Zacchaeus. "Who are you trying to fool? You know you've cheated us. You've cheated us because you work for the Romans. You've cheated us, your fellow citizens of Jericho, by keeping some of our own tax money." So they must have been looking at him very angrily. And the Pharisees were looking at him very suspiciously. And I'll pay back 4 times the amount. That's a lot. So if I owe you $1, I'm going to pay you, maybe I'll pay you a whole $5 back. You're 1 plus 4 more. That's 5. Zacchaeus is being very change of heart here, right? Remember our connection to St. Augustine. Zacchaeus has lived a very self-centered, narcissistic, cheating way of life. Could care about anybody but himself and satisfying the Roman governor, because he doesn't want to be put on the cross. But now he's having this change of heart. He hears about Jesus. He sees Jesus. And Jesus does not ridicule him. Jesus does not judge Zacchaeus. Jesus says, I'm going to have dinner with you tonight, Zacchaeus. Change of heart is taking place. Why? Because Jesus is now in his heart. Today, salvation has come to this house, says Jesus. Zacchaeus is saved. Why? Because of his change of heart. How do we know his heart's been changed? He starts giving back the money or half the property that was not really his in the first place. He starts to give it all back to the people. That's not going to make the Romans happy, but then again, Zacchaeus is having a change of heart because now Jesus is in his heart. Isn't that amazing, boys and girls, children, and children of any ages? What you and I can do when Jesus is in our heart, the wonders that we can truly do, no matter how many wrongs we may have done in the past. When Jesus enters our heart, like Zacchaeus, like St. Augustine, we can do wonderful gifts of faith, hope, and love. Jesus said to him, because to this man, too, is a son of Abraham. So, Jesus is reminding his fellow Jewish people, Zacchaeus is also a Jew. He also is part of the house of Abraham. And Abraham was the father in the Old Testament of the Jewish people. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember those names? So Jesus doesn't say Zacchaeus is kicked out of the Jewish people. He's very much part of the Jewish people. So he's reminding the people he's one of us. He's done wrong, but he's still one of us. The Son of Man has come to seek out and save what was lost. Remember the Good Shepherd parable that Jesus will convey? The one lost sheep, he's got 99. Well, you might think, well, just write it off. And Zacchaeus' understanding, take a tax break. You got one lost sheep, write it off. You still got 99. That's not how Jesus thinks. I got one lost sheep, I got to go find that one lost sheep. Or, for our understanding, that one lost person. Zacchaeus was lost. He was in the darkness. Now he's seen the light. Zacchaeus is found. Why is he found? Because Jesus found him. It is Jesus who finds you and finds me. It is Jesus who saves you and saves me. And whatever tree we have to climb down to get closer to Jesus, and you can use your own imagination, whatever tree you or I are up at times in our lives that keeps us away from Jesus or just curious about Jesus. But like Zacchaeus, once we hear the voice of Jesus, then we get closer, as close as possible. In Holy Communion, Jesus visits our souls. And salvation comes to you and I through Jesus, his divine life of grace. Grace is a help. Grace is a divine help, a helpline that helps us to stay close to Jesus and to be his disciples. We all need grace because we all need help in our discipleship with Jesus. Thus, we are enabled to live a life pleasing to God. What a wonderful story about Zacchaeus. First, Zacchaeus was self-centered. Then he was concerned about others, sharing what he could with them. First, Zacchaeus was lost among the people of Israel, and because of Jesus, he was found. And like St. Augustine, who's well worth some research today, like St. Augustine, who also lived a very self-centered, narcissistic way of life, only what he wanted to do. I'm sure Augustine, if he knew the words, he'd sing the song My Way by Mr. Sinatra. It was always Augustine's way. It was probably always Zacchaeus' way too. Until Zacchaeus and until Augustine found the way in Jesus Christ. So children, and children of all ages, there's nothing so wrong that you and I can do that should ever keep us away from the love of Jesus in our heart. And with Jesus in our heart, we will change the world. God give you peace. I look forward to being with you on Monday for another Bible story. So please count your blessings. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.